Hey, what up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here with the review of tonight's WWE Network exclusive show, a part of the Undertaker week, which was JBL. Legends with JBL. Of course, he had a wrestling roundtable tonight, which was Stone Cold Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H. Honestly, I thought this was a very, very good show. But honestly, when the 30 minutes was up and the show was over, I honestly threw my pen because I thought this was going to be an hour-long show. I thought we were going to be seeing a lot more of this, and JBL was the host. He was trying to steer the conversation, but at the same time, he was adding just as much in. He wasn't like he was interviewing these three guys. He was just trying to point them in there, and as they were talking about things that happened in their career, he was adding in things. I don't understand why this just wasn't, a wrestling roundtable. The JBL show, when he had Eric Bischoff on, was a very, very good show. I thought that them two having a one-on-one conversation, but honestly, when JBL's trying to talk to guys and trying to steer a conversation with everybody trying to get their own words and having so many people there, it was hard to do. And especially for them to fit this into a 30-minute episode, very, very tough. But a very, very fun show. Basically, they were talking about the career of The Undertaker, and they were talking about, when they were all coming up together, these are guys that were in the locker room. They were all leaders of their locker room. Of course, Triple H wouldn't really become. Well, I guess you can say he was, because Undertaker's been on top the whole time. But I was sort of thinking that Triple H sort of had to wait a little bit longer to become that main event guy. But he was on top for a good little while. But these were all guys that would sit in the locker room and knew that they were the reason why people were coming to the show. They were the reason why WWF was the top promotion. And, they'd always make jokes about them, about who was going to last the longest. And Stone Cold Steve Austin says that, the Undertaker's still here wrestling today, going on his 25-year anniversary. And he made it 13 years longer than Stone Cold Steve Austin did, who retired after WrestleMania 19, way back in, I guess that was 2003. But definitely they talk about the debut of The Undertaker at Survivor Series 1990, when he came out with Brother Love, and of course he was brought in by the $1 Million Man. And they talk about how everybody knew that this was going to be one hell of an angle. This was one hell of a character that Undertaker was going to be doing, but nobody really thought that it was going to last all that long, because how much stuff could you really do with the dead man? Basically, Undertaker was on a fast track. He came in within 1 year. He was main eventing Survivor Series 1991, going after the championship against Hulk Hogan. He is the guy who beat Hulkamania with the outside interference of Ric Flair, which would set up I thought at the time he was trying to set up Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, a match that never happened in WWF. We would have to wait until both of the guys would go to WCW. But this was just a fast track, a back-to-back pay-per-view. I believe that the pay-per-view was on a Sunday. I'm not 100% sure. It might have been on a Saturday. And then they did a pay-per-view almost exactly right after that on Tuesday. Barely any time in between it. It was a sort of a trial and error by Vince McMahon to see how much people would do it. Survivor Series was the main pay-per-view. I bet it was $30. But they did the Tuesday in Texas show, trying to see if Hulk Hogan losing and Undertaker being the champion would drive people to pay another $20. The people that bought Survivor Series more than likely would want closure on what had happened at Survivor Series. They would pay for it. But for the people who didn't buy Survivor Series, would they turn around and buy the Tuesday in Texas pay-per-view because of the fact that they were shocked that they missed Hulk Hogan losing? They're definitely not going to miss the rematch to see what would happen from there. Hogan, of course, would beat Undertaker. They wouldn't have another match probably until 2002, when Hogan came back, and Hogan would drop a championship to Undertaker after his 1 month run as being the champion on top, which was a disaster in its own right. But we never got the Hogan Flair match. We never got the Undertaker versus Hogan match. So all in all, it was basically just a trial to see if that Tuesday in Texas would work. And Vince would go back to the Tuesday pay-per-views for the Cyber Sundays, and Taboo Tuesday, not Taboo Tuesdays. What were they called? He had a pay-per-view on Tuesday, and I can't remember what the fuck those things were called. It wasn't Cyber Sundays, but it was the people voted on what they wanted to see, because I remember like Triple H was begging people to vote to put him and Ric Flair into a steel cage match. But it is what it is. We'll move on from there. But I love those voting pay-per-view shows for when they had them. They go over the fact that the Undertaker character, they really knocked it out of the park. They probably could have given that character to 1,000 other wrestlers, and 1,000 other wrestlers wouldn't have been able to pull off what he did. They gave Undertaker props on, in that 1990 to 1991, when, wrestling was starting to turn around, when you had Hulk Hogan leaving the WWF, and you had Shawn Michaels, and you had Bret Hart on the rise. So many of the wrestlers were trying to go faster, trying to sort of change the pace of wrestling. Undertaker would have that slow walk to the ring. He would have that slow moves throughout his moveset. He really wasn't turning it up, and that's what sort of made him different than everybody else that was on the roster, and sort of set him apart from what else was going on. They tell a story, JBL does, of a story that I'd never heard of, that basically Undertaker coming and being the Undertaker in WWF almost never happened. During Undertaker's last match, which was WCW, Undertaker, his hip popped out of place, and as everybody knows, Undertaker is like a gamer, and he's a guy that really comes to play. If he's booked for a match, he's going to go into it, and he wrestled that last WCW match with his hip out of place. Vince, who saw this last match before the fact that Undertaker came in for an interview, basically thought that Undertaker was a guy that had a whole lot of size, he had a great look, but because the hip was out of place, thought that was a guy that couldn't move within the ring. Undertaker came in, he thought he had a good meeting with Vince McMahon, even though the doubt was in the back of his mind that he wasn't going to be able to pull this off. Undertaker goes and gives his notice to WCW that he's leaving the territory, and little did he know that Vince McMahon almost really didn't hire him, and it ended up being Bruce Pritchard who talked him into being able to do it. I don't know if he had the inside track on knowing what had happened, but Undertaker got to be Undertaker, and he got to come in. One of the things that's talked about the Undertaker more than anything else is how loyal he is to Vince McMahon. When he made the jump in 1990 to come to WWF, he's been there longer than longer than anybody else. Anybody else that's been there for any period of time, close to him would have to be a guy like Mark Henry, who didn't come in until like 1996. Kane would come in somewhere around that time as well. So, Undertaker has the longest reigning, WWE wrestler in by far. But definitely they tell a story of Kevin Nash calling to see if there was interest for Undertaker to switch sides. I've heard Kevin Nash talk about I don't know how to say this, but I didn't know that Kevin Nash was the guy that was honestly making the phone calls to The Undertaker. But during shoot interviews with Kevin Nash, I've heard Kevin Nash mention to the fact that, when Undertaker switched his gimmick from being the dead man and switching over and becoming the biker, that was mainly because if WCW was the call, he could show up on WCW, riding a motorcycle, having the biker's gear. They can call him whatever they need to call him. He just basically, he can't take the name, but it's hard for Undertaker to come to WCW wrestling as the dead man and then try to figure out what was going on. So by him reinventing himself, it would be good for him if WCW was the call, but I'm sure that definitely Vince had him on lockdown, and there was probably double intentions from Kevin Nash. Sure, if Undertaker does make the switch, that's a game changer. One of the main guys at WWF coming to WCW, that's going to be a lot of interest coming with it. But definitely, when Kevin Nash and Scott Hall signed their contract, one of the best things that they had included in there is that basically, if anybody came to WCW and signed a contract larger than theirs, their contract would automatically be bumped up to the fact that they're getting paid the same thing as somebody else was getting paid. I can't remember if this was besides for Hulk Hogan, or if this was them getting the same money as Hulk Hogan, but Nash and Hall cleaned up in WCW. They made a ton of money when they were there, and definitely they talk about that's one of the reasons why they really pitched for Bischoff to bring in Bret Hart, because of the fact that if Bret Hart got signed, Bret Hart would get signed to a large deal, Nash and Hall would get the bump in pay, and they'd be wrestling doing the same thing they were doing, but for the fact that they gave that thing in their contract, they would get a raise as well. They talk about the fact of Undertaker wrestling the last match of Shawn Michaels' career. They asked Shawn if he got to pick the opponent, and he said that he didn't. Basically, it was just the way that things panned out. They went out, they had a great match at WrestleMania 25. Michael Hayes thought it would be a great idea to have the rematch at WrestleMania 26. Shawn was already thinking of retiring, so basically he just said to make it a career match, and that's what they went out and did. And I think people didn't think that 26 was going to be able to live up to 25. They definitely got the main event spot, which they talked about the fact that at 25, that's one of the things that made the match so much better, is because Undertaker really gives it his all when he gets all fired up. And Undertaker, definitely, you guys have heard the stories about WrestleMania 23 when he had the match against Batista. Batista and Undertaker both thought that they should have had the main event spot that year, which ended up going to Cena and Shawn Michaels, which you could say wasn't the right move. But definitely when Batista and Undertaker came through the curtain after the match, they yelled at everybody to follow that. It wasn't just to Vince McMahon. It wasn't just to the writers and the guys that put the show together. It was to the roster that they thought they deserved to be there. And when Undertaker and Shawn Michaels were told they were going to be 5th at WrestleMania 25, they sort of took that as a knock, and they didn't want to do that, but it is what it was. Triple H talks about the fact that he was going to be wrestling against Randy Orton that night, and he knew right off the bat that he was getting screwed. He said as the match was going on, he walked into the trainer's room and grabbed some tape to tape his fingers and his wrists and things like that. And he said he sat there. It was only supposed to be a minute trip into the trainer room, and he ended up sitting there watching 15 minutes of the match. And then immediately after the match was over, he knew that he was screwed. But because of the fact that he saw one of the best wrestling matches of his life of being a wrestling fan, he felt good for the business, but at the same time, he just knew that for him and Orton, there was nothing they could do to save that match at WrestleMania 25. I'm guessing that a lot like the Eric Bischoff interview with the JBL, that we're going to see part 2 on Thursday after SmackDown. So we'll be sitting around and waiting on that, and hopefully it's going to be a good one, and I'll see you guys down the road.